Mind Your Farm Business on RealAgriculture.com is brought to you by RBC Royal Bank.
Hello and welcome to the 100th episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, brought to you by RBC Royal Bank. I'm your host, Sean Haney of RealAgriculture.com. Today, we're excited to welcome back Dr. Jessica Metcalfe for a second conversation on a topic that resonates deeply with farmers and ranchers across Canada and the United States: dealing with stress, anxiety, and burnout. Now, in our last episode, we dove into the different symptoms and warning signs. Today, we're taking it a step further to focus on actionable strategies and practical steps for managing these pressures effectively. From recognizing the importance of sleep and nutrition to learning techniques for quieting that inner critic, Dr. Metcalfe will help us navigate the challenges that come with farming in high-stress work environments. These are valuable insights you can implement in your daily life to foster resilience and create a healthier balance between the demands of your work and personal well-being. Let's get to it. So, Dr. Metcalfe, now that we have identified, what is stress, what is anxiety, and what is burnout, now we got to deal with it. And so, this is where the work begins, okay? Yeah. So, the real work, we're going to roll up our sleeves here and sweat it out. So, I guess let's park burnout for a second. Dealing with stress and anxiety. Yeah. What do we do there?
Yeah. So for stress and anxiety, I would say it's understanding how it shows up for you first. So then that way it makes a little bit more sense and it doesn't feel like it's debilitating. And okay, so let me explain it. So there is a psychologist by the name of Dr. Dan Siegel who talks about the exercise Name It to Tame It. And essentially what you're doing is you're naming the emotion that you're experiencing. So you could be experiencing anxiety as a whole, but there's something else that's going on. So maybe disappointment or frustration or sadness or anger, okay? When you can name it, you take a moment and you figure out how it is actually showing up for you. So for anxiety, let's say you're getting ready for a new season and you're hearing that the weather system's coming through, that they're not going to be that great this year. So now you're worried, okay, are we going to have a sustainable crop year? And what does that actually look like? So now you've already started to think way in advance. And so now that future thinking is causing you to worry. But you are right now, you got to plant your seeds first, or you got to start off on whatever day one looks like for you. So let's focus on that one. So naming it to tame it, name it to tame it gives you the opportunity to take back that emotion, allow you to feel what it is. So you're feeling anxiety, your heart is racing, maybe you got that pit in your stomach. It's recognizing, okay, these are the symptoms that I am experiencing as of right now based on this emotion. It's not going to stay stuck in me. It will eventually pass. And the way that you can then allow it to start to move through you is recognizing, okay, my thoughts already started to go into 3, 4, 5, 6 months from now, but what do I need to do today? And so that's one portion of being able to understand how that connection between our mind and our body exists. For decades, and I'd say multiple decades at this point, probably even centuries, we've kind of disconnected like how our body, we don't really listen into our body. And so what ends up happening? Okay, well, let's say I have acid reflux or I develop some sort of stomach ulcer. Okay, I'm going to go to the doctor, or I'll just get a pill for it and I'm just going to keep working the way that I'm working. That's only going to give you a short-term response. It's not going to fix from a long-term perspective. So we need to start listening to what our body is saying. It is really easy to listen to ourselves when we have to go through surgery, when we have a cancer diagnosis and we have to go through chemo, or we break our arm. If we break our arm and we see a cast and it's 6 to 8 weeks, we have a visual representation that we need to take care of it. So don't put too much pressure on it. Don't lift too much weight. Don't get it wet. There's a whole bunch of lists of things. We can do that with how our just body feels on a natural basis every day, to be able to check in with ourselves, to be able to manage our anxiety as well. So then at that point in time, because we understand how it shows up, we then get to figure out, okay, because my heart is racing, because my stomach is churning right now, And let's say I'm at work. What do I need to do at work to be able to calm myself down? Okay. If you're outside of work and your thoughts are running wild, because it's usually in those quiet moments in time where we start to experience it, we then get to ask ourselves, okay, should I go for a walk? Do I need to do something physical? Do I need to write something down? Do I need to talk to someone? But we have to give ourselves the opportunity to be able to create these spaces and say, when I am feeling this, naming it, in order to tame it, I have to have something there for me to be able to tap into. Now, this is why burnout can take 1 to 4 years to recover from. It's because you have to figure out what works for you. So I know for myself, I can't and I don't want to go to a yoga class. Like it's not for me. Do I stretch? Yes. Okay, but it's in a very different way. I don't want someone telling me what to do. It just doesn't work. I've done yoga and every once in a while I'll throw one back in there, but for me, it just doesn't work. So you have to find what works for you. Do I sit and I meditate? Yes, 100%, but I'm sitting on my couch when I'm doing it. I'm not necessarily sitting on my floor with my legs crossed, where we automatically have, and social media has given us this perception of a visual representation of what these things are supposed to look like. They just need to be familiar and okay for you. That's it. It's no one else's mold. It's your mold. And what does that look like to be able to create what that mold of you and your self-care looks like?
Well, I asked the question from kind of a reactive standpoint, but the things you described there are also very preventative.
Yes. Yep.
Right? From, whatever stress or issues you need to deal with that do come your way, you're better able to deal with them, especially from a mental side, if you're going through some of those things that do work for you. And like you said, some things work for some people that don't work for others. You got to find your groove and experiment. Obviously, and I know when we had a chance to meet face to face, you had mentioned the importance of sleep, and I said I was a constant offender on this one. So why is it so important?
So you mentioned reactivity, and when we have less sleep, we are more reactive. That's just science. It's what we know. Our capacity at that point in time to be able to manage stressors decreases, and we become more irritable, and our emotions become more heightened. And depending on understanding yourself, I know that everyone responds a little bit different. Your peak of anger might mean that you're so frustrated that you need to go for a walk because you're going to yell at someone, and maybe then you're going to regret what you end up saying. For someone else, that anger might actually turn into tears because they're still so frustrated, and that's where their anger just displaces itself. And so they choose not to write that email because it's still going to be just as angry at that point in time. And so when it comes to sleep, the importance of it is recognizing that instead of pulling from our sleep, because that's where we usually go, if we need more hours in a day, we pull from our sleep. I urge you not to pull from your sleep and to make sleep a priority. Turn it into something that is just as important as getting your to-do list done and reaching those profit margins. Sleep is just as important, so you have to make it a priority. When you pull from your sleep, and let's say you're someone who says, well, I only need 6 hours. Research has shown that you need more than 6. It's an automatic. Research has shown that it's an automatic that you need more than 6. What ends up happening is that you stay at the sub-level because your body just got used to those 6 hours, but you're actually not performing at 100% of what your capacity and your capabilities actually are. So you're fine with it. You're okay because 6 hours, you're tolerating, you're moving through the day. It's not that you're not functioning at all. It's just you're still below functioning what you could actually be at.
And I think probably a lot of the audience is like, okay, so I for a crop farmer, during the winter, I get lots of sleep. Yeah. During, say, planting or harvest time, I have like a short sprint where I'm on a reduced, I have 4 or 5 hours. It kind of depends, but you know what? I'll do better during the winter period. Yeah. For some people, what they do is like, you know what? I'll get basically 4 hours of sleep Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday nights I go to bed super early and I'll get like 13, 12 hours, something like that, and I'll catch up.
Yeah.
the catch-up strategy really doesn't work.
No, that's not. You're still in a deficit.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately the body doesn't, we may think from a numbers perspective, it makes sense where it's like, okay, I totally caught up. But from a physiological standpoint, our body doesn't react to those numbers the exact same way.
Yeah.
So are there periods of time if you do get those shortened, what does that actually look like? What I would do is I would prepare yourself for knowing that if you are going to be suboptimal, if you know that you're someone who's more irritable, then give yourself a little bit of easing grace during that time. Because I recognize that same thing with night shift workers. Research has shown is if you actually have a night shift, and that is the majority of your working job, you are more likely to actually have a heart attack. And the reason for that is because our body is just not used to that. And so the same thing with the 4 hours, the 5 hours over a season, instead of just gobbling up all of 12, 13, 14 hours in one, can you go back and can you say, okay, can I get 5 or 6? Just a little bit more. So then you're not just in a massive deficit overall. Because what ends up happening too is because you've swung the other way, there's a potential that you actually wake up groggy at that point in time. And then you're just slower during the day as well. And again, from a mental and a clarity component, that's what we want to try to maintain is that our brain isn't just going through these ups and downs and ups and downs.
We'll get back to the Mind Your Farm Business podcast shortly, but first a word from our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank.
This episode of Mind Your Farm Business podcast is brought to you by RBC. Maybe you've had an idea about upgrading your operation, or finally getting that renovation done, or buying some new equipment. Or you want to be a little less reliant on the weather from season to season. Get some help making it happen by speaking with an RBC Agriculture account manager. Then, set up an investment plan to make even more of your ideas happen. Visit rbc.com/chartyourcourse and get started today.
From a stress management perspective, what role does the food that we're consuming play in all this? It's got to be big, right?
Yeah. So we now know that our gut has a brain in and of itself. And so how you're choosing to nourish yourself is just as important as sleep, just as important as your self-care routine and the experiments that you're running. So if you are on little sleep, you are more likely to crave sugar and carbs to begin with. And if you have those sugars and carbs just before you go to bed, then your sleep cycles aren't going to be the greatest sleep cycles either. So now we're just constantly chasing this lack of sleep with potentially how we're choosing to nourish ourselves through food when it's actually detrimental to us overall. So what I urge you is that when you are getting those truncated sleep periods of time based off of where you are in your seasonal work, it's then knowing that certain meals need to be had and you need to make that a priority then. So instead of just saying, okay, I'm going to get to bed. And as we get to the end of the day, we lose all of our motivation. It's just a part of it.
Oh, true. Actually, yes. Case study of one right here. Yes.
It's just a part of being human. And when you're trying to, so you have all this willpower at the beginning of the day, maybe you're not fully rested, but you've woken up from your sleep. So your willpower is higher at that point in time. You haven't gone through your day. So you haven't had multiple spikes of your stress hormone or your cortisol. And so you get to the end of the day, you're tired, you're exhausted, and all you want to do is just get into bed and just rest or take a moment in time to sit with family or in front of the TV or read your book, whatever your rest point is. It's in those moments that you should have planned in advance, so then you're not fighting to just find that willpower inside of you to eat well. If you had planned that in advance, I'm not talking about meal prepping or anything, but just having certain things available as your go-to, then now you're nourishing yourself while you have that lack of sleep too. Yeah. So when we're taking all these different components, at times we just move life, especially as high achievers and high performers, where it's just all of these things just get pushed out of the way because it's like you're striving for that goal. And it's like, it doesn't matter. I don't need those carrots. I don't need that healthy sleep, and I don't need whatever it is. because I have this single focus with my horse blinders on and I'm going to get to that goal. But what if you paid attention to that sleep? Just had an extra couple minutes of a thought around it and paid just a couple extra minutes to taking care of yourself. The longevity for you in your industry is that much longer and it's that much more sustainable instead of kind of going through these waves. Now, some of the research in regards to burnout shows 10-year, actually, when I dove into the research, I was like, how is it possible to take 10 years to recover from burnout? Like, this doesn't make sense. It's going to be hopeless for so many people if they get a diagnosis of burnout and someone says to them, well, you've got another decade ahead of you before you've actually come out of it. Okay. But what is that showing us? It takes a shorter period of time to navigate burnout if you run more experiments, if you start changing certain patterns, if you get going and you've admitted to yourself that something is wrong and you need to change. It takes longer because you're still running your experiments, or you keep repeating the same old patterns. You feel a little bit better and you just go back to your old self. You feel a little bit better and you go back to your old self. But your old self isn't helping you anymore because it's what's got you there to begin with. So how do you then navigate it out? By giving yourself some ease and grace and time and setting yourself up for success.
What about the inner voice? You talk about this a lot in your book. I thought it was a fantastic part of it because I think everybody sort of deals with the voices in their head and how that impacts how we feel about stress and even burnout.
Yeah. So the way that I like to break it down is, as a whole, we have two main voices, and we could have a couple more than that. It just depends on how you choose to label them. And I like to label them, one is your inner gremlin or your inner critic, and then one is your inner champion or cheerleader. And again, you get to put whatever name to it that you want on what connects with you. And so your inner gremlin, you can confuse it because that is where myself, other high achievers have said, where it's just like, I'll sleep when I'm dead. Just keep pushing. Or you're a failure. You suck. You can't do this. And you use that as your motivation to keep going. But if you use all those negative terms and you convince yourself that sleep isn't important because you just have to push through, and that I won't have that extra piece of bread right now, I just need it while I'm just kind of moving through the day, or that Timbit or that extra double, whatever it is for you, okay? I'll just figure it out later. It's fine for right now. Your inner gremlin is just kind of adding on and adding on and adding on. And it's not until you give your inner champion or cheerleader the opportunity to be able to give you some self-compassion, to know that you don't have to be running at 100% all the time, and that you can take a break, and that it is okay if a mistake happens, and that you're still allowed to hit all your targets and reach for the stars and do all of those things, while also choosing to take care of yourself and prioritize family and friends and your interests and love and all of that stuff. And that gives you the opportunity to really hone in on saying that I can work, and I can work freaking hard, and I know I can do it, but I can also work really hard in my own personal life as well. And that's not bad. That's not horrible. And it doesn't mean that I won't get to achieving that goal either.
From a solution standpoint, what we can do about this, what's the difference between men and women?
Good question. Women will talk about it more, men won't.
Okay, case study of one.
And I think that just comes from societal's expectations on how we still categorize women and men at times. And so the expectation for men is that you're supposed to be a provider and strong and masculine and come in on this white horse and save the day and all that stuff. And so if those are all kind of hidden biases that are happening underneath everything, and that's what maybe got passed down through family or through your friend dynamic or even on social media on what's being pushed to you on your algorithm, if that is all you choose to see, and then talking about what your inner voice is actually saying to you is bad, or asking for help, or just sharing what's going on right now, then you're never going to be able to figure out what you need for you, because you're never giving yourself the opportunity to explore. With women, because there's a little bit already of that underlying nurturing component and a little bit more of a safe environment to talk about it, we have more of those conversations. It doesn't change the fact, though, that there is still guilt and frustration similar to men around how we're choosing to speak to ourselves. Now, over the last few years, I've seen a huge change in what that actually looks like across the generations, which is great, because I think what we were seeing is more younger millennials and Gen Z were having more conversations around emotional intelligence, because their Gen X parents and their elder millennial parents were wanting to have more of those conversations. And so the more conversations that we do have, the easier it becomes that we can have these conversations, and that it doesn't matter who the conversation that you're having it with is, whether it's of the same sex or the opposite sex, you can still feel comfortable talking about it and saying, you know what? I'm having a really hard time right now, and this is what I'm thinking. Can I bounce something off of you right now? That just opens up dialogue. That doesn't admit your defeat at all. It just shows you that you're struggling at this moment in time, and it's okay to struggle, and that you're looking for a solution. And in order to find that solution, if you're just stuck in your head and you're spiraling in your anxiety, no solution is going to be able to come into that spiral. So you have to look to your environment. Now, if you don't feel comfortable necessarily talking to someone yet, ChatGPT is actually really great nowadays too, to be able to lean on. So I want you to know that you can start somewhere, whether it's with a friend or a peer group or a medical professional, or even if you're walking on the street and you tend to be someone who is outgoing, you can lean to the next person. You can always say, hey, can I share something with you? It's totally fine. And I think what I hope we don't lose, because I do think that we're looking for it more, is community. And community has a huge impact on how we navigate out of burnout, because we need support systems. We need social rest. We need to be able to find people that have similar values and similar interests, that they will share these things with us so we have common ground. And you can't go throughout the world just being by yourself, because loneliness is actually high up on the scale of what kills us nowadays. And so we need to make sure we find that community too.
Dr. Metcalfe, this has been fantastic. I really appreciate you joining us here for the Mind Your Farm Business podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
That brings us to the end of this special 100th episode of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast. A big thank you to Dr. Jessica Metcalfe for joining us once again and providing such practical and insightful advice on managing stress and burnout. Her strategies, from understanding the name it to tame it technique to fostering a supportive community, are incredibly valuable, especially in high-pressure environments like farming. Dr. Metcalfe's reminder to prioritize sleep, focus on nutrition, and tune into our bodies provides a solid foundation for anyone looking to build resilience and take better care of themselves. I know for me, I do need more sleep after hearing from Dr. Metcalfe. And we discussed today creating a self-care plan that's personalized to what works best for you can make all the difference. For more episodes of the Mind Your Farm Business podcast, head over to mindyourfarmbusiness.com or check out the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, like YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcast. Also, thank you to our sponsor, RBC Royal Bank, for making this whole podcast series possible. Thank you for listening. And until next time, keep on minding your farm business.